You ever get that little quiet feeling that something in your life is shifting, not a thunderclap, but a slow creak, like a hinge that's been rusting for years, and then one morning it just snaps? That's how it started for me, standing in my little front yard with a watering can, sun up and coffee still warm on the porch, when a woman from down the street came stomping over in what looked like a bathrobe and a fury like she'd been saving it for years. She pointed at my house like I'd stolen something sacred and said, flat as anyone can be, "You're in the wrong place." She wanted me to swap houses, because apparently the house had seniority. 3 sentences into it, I knew this wasn't about property lines. It was about pride and something deeper, a town that keeps score by how long your lawn has been green. I'm Jonah. I moved into the blue 2-story last spring, fixed the porch light, put in some petunias. I'm not the type who likes trouble. I'm the kind who keeps receipts and records little things, video of delivery drivers, timestamps on emails, because life has taught me that memory gets fuzzy and proof doesn't. So when Mrs. Halvorson, that's what the town calls her now, but we'll get to names, started knocking at my door, I had my phone on the counter. She called me a thief in front of my neighbor's kid, accused me of taking sunlight. She called 911 to file a complaint about a garden hose. It's almost funny thinking back, until you realize humor was a thin sheet over something much heavier. At first the police came, all calm and polite, like they were refereeing a spat over a parking spot. They asked questions, they made notes, they left. That's when the real show began. Over the next 2 weeks, little things started to go missing or get rearranged. My mailbox was jammed. My gardener's truck had paint scratches overnight. There were notes taped to my door, "You don't belong." The neighbors said, "It'll blow over." My sister said, "Document it." My brother said, "Lock the cameras." I did all 3, because the world makes room for that kind of cautiousness. Then the man showed up. Not a lawyer, not really, but he came wearing a suit 2 sizes too small and a badge that looked like it came from a thrift store. He had a stack of papers and a kind of confidence that fell apart when you looked closely. He handed me a document that claimed the house had been under a communal claim for decades. He used words like prepossession inspection and benevolent exchange, as if being vague made intimidation legal. I asked him calmly, "Are you an attorney?" He gave me this smirk and said, "Does it matter?" It mattered to me, so I hit record. He left with a threat and a promise that I'd answer to a court if I didn't cooperate. What you should understand is this: people don't escalate from note-taping to harassment for no reason. There's a motive that lives under the shouting. In this case, it was a slow-burning thing. Entitlement turned into panic. Mrs. Halvorson's house had been showing its bones. Her roof sagged in a place it shouldn't, paint peeled like it was giving up, and in a town where everyone pretends everything is fine, she'd been pretending the longest. Her nephew, who fancied himself a fixer-upper and part-time authority, started showing up because he saw leverage. If he could get me out, he thought, maybe he could make a play for something else, a property angle, a favor, the illusion of control. So my family stepped in. My sister, Maggie, is the sort of person who reads fine print for fun and hates injustice the way some people hate cilantro. My brother, Marcus, can point out a structural flaw from across the yard and has hands that fix things other people break. Between Maggie's digging and Marcus's suspicions, we started to build a little map of motive. Maggie found the nephew's past not a clean record, a lot of bluster, a failed attempt at getting certified, a history of promising more than he could deliver. Marcus climbed up on the Halvorson porch and tapped with the back of a hammer, quiet like a doctor checking for a fever, and he told me to look at the foundation line, at the way the steps dipped where they weren't supposed to. There was rot under the glamour, and that rot smelled like leverage. What followed felt like war played out in suburban terms. There were nights where we found nails strewn across our driveway. Mornings we'd sweep away broken flower pots. The city inspector came once for a complaint about noise and left with an annoyed shrug. The nephew tried to bait me, yelled through my fence, "You think you can buy your way to respect?" He had people listening, neighbors who remembered when his family ran bake sales and block parties, who found it easier to believe the loud man than the quiet one who keeps receipts. The turning point was smaller than a shouting match and bigger than a lawsuit. Maggie and I decided to call in a professional, a licensed structural engineer who'd seen more condemned porches than a horror writer. We didn't do it to humiliate. We did it because when danger is hidden inside plaster and wiring, you don't get to moralize, you get to get an expert. The engineer, a soft-spoken woman named Rosa, arrived with tools that looked like they belonged to a spaceship, and she moved through the Halvorsen house like someone reading a body tapping, shining light into crawl spaces, measuring moisture with a device that beeped in a tone that made conversation stop. She sent us pictures later, dark cavities where insulation had not been for years, wiring that should have been replaced in the 90s, beams that were carrying weight they shouldn't have. Her report said what Marcus had feared: load-bearing failure, severe mold, electrical hazards that could have started a fire. When the report came back, sitting on my kitchen table felt heavy, like a verdict you didn't want but needed. We sent copies to the city. We gave Rosa a signed statement. We posted a portion of the findings online, not to shame, but because the truth moves differently when it has a timestamp and a professional signature. The nephew went into panic mode. He started showing up with louder friends, threats that tasted like desperation. "You're the one who called the city," he screamed one afternoon on my lawn, a woman from down the block recording with her phone because she'd chosen a side. I walked up to him, held out the report, and said, quietly, "This is why we did what we did." He tried to grab the papers, and for a moment I thought he might. Then he stopped, the sound of his breath loud in the open air, and he seemed to realize the story wasn't in his hands anymore. The city inspector, the one who once shrugged, came back with a clipboard and a weight in his voice I hadn't heard before. They posted signs, the kind that looked like coroner's notices in a slow, bureaucratic cadence: unsafe to occupy. It's funny how something so official makes humiliation so visible. The Halvorsen house sat there, a neat rectangle with a red sign on the door, and the neighborly gossip started to move like a small, hungry river. People who'd been silent for weeks found their voices. The nephew's bluster turned into calls to contractors, frantic whispers about insurance, sobs hidden behind curtains. The woman who'd first stormed my yard, who'd made me feel like my very presence was a violation, packed a box or two and looked at the house she'd defended like a sunken ship. There was no dramatic courtroom moment, no cinematic arrest, just the heavy machinery of civic process doing its slow work. The city condemned the house. The nephew had to answer for misrepresentation to a handful of officials, and the neighborhood sort of rebalanced like a scale with a missing weight. For me, the payoff wasn't gloating. It was standing on my porch one evening, the light low and forgiving, and feeling like the ground was steady again. But satisfaction is complicated. There's relief, and there's this small, uneasy knowledge that justice was procedural, not moral absolution. Mrs. Halvorsen was still a person who had lived, who had hurt and been hurt, who had reasons, messy, human reasons, for acting the way she did. I didn't want her to lose everything. I wanted the truth to matter more than a one-sided loudness. The last scene that played out for me, the image that sits there when I close my eyes, was her moving van, slow as a heart beating, and a little boy from 2 doors over waving at the packed boxes. He asked his mother, "Did she do a bad thing?" And she answered, "She did some bad things and some scared things." That line has stuck with me, because it's the truest part of this whole mess. People act from fear as much as from malice. That doesn't excuse, but it explains. And in a town that polices itself by memory and rumor, evidence is the only thing that can change what people remember. I won't pretend it's perfect now. There are still glances when I walk down Main, and there are neighbors who think I overreacted, who whisper about how this upset the balance. There are others who come by and drop a casserole, or ask if they can park a truck for a week, or say, "Good on you for not letting it slide." Life moves on in small increments. Lawns get mowed. The hardware store sees another spade of screw sales. Children play in yards that now feel a little more watched. If there's a lesson here, it's less about victory and more about what we owe one another in a community. We owe honesty when we can give it, and we owe scrutiny when things don't add up, and we owe compassion even when we must choose to protect ourselves. Document. Ask for help. Call the right people. Hold your voice steady. Those are practical things. But the softer lesson is this: people who shout the loudest aren't always right, and people who suffer the quietest sometimes have the truest burden. I wish for more nuance in our judgments. I wish for less rush to side with tradition without inspection. So tell me, what would you have done? Was my choice to call the city the right one, or too harsh? Do you think Mrs. Halvorsen deserved the consequence? Or should we have helped her fix the roof before it came to condemnation? Drop a comment. Tell me where you stand on this justice community, and what we owe the neighbors we don't always understand. Share this if you think evidence matters more than loudness, and tell a friend who's been on the fence about a neighborly fight. I'll read every comment. I want to know if you've ever stood with your phone in your hand and had to decide whether to record, to step in, or to step back.